Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and here every whisper hides a mystery. These Miss Marple stories are my own creations, written just for you. So lean in and let the clues begin. In the shadowy halls of Greenshaw's Folly, an eccentric heiress lies stabbed with her own letter opener. Her priceless will vanished into thin air. Enter Miss Marple, the unassuming sleuth with eyes like daggers, unravelling a web of deceit. A disguised secretary with a forged past, a terrified gardener's wife hiding deadly secrets, and a husband entangled in gambling debts and stolen jewels. As clues bloom like poisoned roses, a silk scarf, a charred signature, a midnight greenhouse rendezvous, watch as greed turns to murder, and one sharp mind exposes the killer. Buckle up! The Folly's legacy is about to explode. Chapter 1. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's sitting room in St. Mary Mead, casting a warm, golden glow over the chintz armchairs and the well-thumbed volumes on her bookshelves. Outside, in the neatly tended garden, Miss Marple herself sat on a wicker chair, her knitting needles moving with the steady precision of a metronome. The wool was a soft lavender, destined for a cardigan for her nephew's youngest, but her mind was far from domestic trifles. She had always found that the rhythmic click-clack of the needles freed her thoughts to wander, and today they wandered toward the enigmatic pile known as Greenshaw's Folly. The letter had arrived with the morning post, its envelope thick and creamy, embossed with a crest that spoke of old money and older eccentricities. Miss Lavinia Greenshaw was not a frequent correspondent. In fact, Miss Marple could recall only one previous note, years ago, inquiring about a rare rose variety for the Folly's overgrown gardens. This one was different, imperious in tone, yet laced with an undercurrent of urgency. "Dear Miss Marple," it read, "I should be most obliged if you would call upon me at your earliest convenience. There is a matter of some delicacy that I believe your particular acumen might illuminate. Tea at 4, if it suits." No signature beyond the flourished LG, as if the sender assumed her identity was unmistakable. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and adjusted her spectacles, rereading the lines with a faint smile. Lavinia Greenshaw was a figure straight out of one of those Gothic novels young girls devoured, heiress to a fortune built on colonial trade, mistress of a mansion that sprawled like a labyrinthine beast on the hill overlooking the village. Whispers in St. Mary Mead painted her as a recluse with a penchant for dramatic gestures, dyeing her hair a defiant crimson in her 60s, collecting bizarre artifacts from far-flung travels, and rewriting her will with the frequency of changing hats. A matter of some delicacy, indeed. Miss Marple wondered if it involved the latest beneficiary, or perhaps a disgruntled one. People, she reflected, were so predictable in their greed, yet endlessly fascinating in how they concealed it. By 3 o'clock, she had donned her best tweed suit and a hat with a discreet feather, setting off along the winding lane that led to the Folly. The air was heavy with the scent of late-blooming honeysuckle, and the path climbed gently through meadows dotted with grazing sheep. As the mansion came into view, its turrets piercing the sky like accusatory fingers, Miss Marple felt a familiar tingle of anticipation. Built by Lavinia's grandfather in a fit of architectural whimsy, the house blended mock Gothic arches with incongruous Victorian additions, ivy-cloaked walls, hiding secret passages, or so the villagers claimed. Miss Marple dismissed such fancies. In her experience, the real secrets were always in the hearts of those who lived within. The iron gates creaked open at her approach, as if by some unseen mechanism, and she made her way up the gravel drive. The door was answered by Alfred, the butler, a stooped figure with the impassive face of one long, accustomed to his mistress's quirks. He led her through echoing halls lined with suits of armour and faded tapestries to the drawing-room, a vast chamber where sunlight struggled through mullioned windows. Portraits of Greenshaw ancestors stared down with haughty disapproval, their eyes seeming to follow every movement. Lavinia Greenshaw rose from a high-backed chair with a rustle of silk, her tall, angular frame commanding the room like a stage actress in her final act. Her hair was indeed that improbable red, piled high in a style that defied gravity, and her fingers sparkled with an array of rings, emeralds, rubies, and a curious black pearl that caught the light ominously. "Miss Marple, how good of you to come," she said, her voice a rich contralto that could charm or command. She gestured to a tray laden with delicate china, cucumber sandwiches, and scones still warm from the oven. "Do sit. I trust the walk wasn't too taxing." As they sipped tea, Earl Grey, strong and unsweetened, Lavinia steered the conversation with artful vagueness. She spoke of the village's changing times, the unreliability of modern servants, and the burdens of maintaining such a grand estate. But her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted repeatedly to the door, and her fingers toyed with a locket at her throat. "One hears things," she said at last, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Whispers of disloyalty, of eyes watching where they shouldn't. You, Miss Marple, have a way of seeing through such veils. Tell me, have you noticed anything untoward in St. Mary Mead of late?" Miss Marple murmured something non-committal about human nature's frailties, her own gaze steady and observant. She noted the faint tremor in Lavinia's hand as she poured a second cup, the way her hostess avoided direct questions about the household. The secretary, Miss Barrow, a brisk young woman with impeccable credentials, had been mentioned in passing, as had the gardener Nat Fletcher and his wife Lily. But Lavinia's words skirted the edges of revelation, like a dancer teasing the spotlight. The visit drew to a close as the grandfather clock struck 5, its chimes echoing through the house like a warning. Lavinia escorted her guest to the door with effusive thanks, but Miss Marple sensed the relief in her hurried farewell. Stepping into the cooling evening air, she paused on the drive, her sharp eyes catching movement near the rosebeds. There was Nat Fletcher, a burly man with soil-stained hands, engaged in a hushed, heated exchange with a slight woman, Lily, no doubt, whose face was flushed with what looked like fear or fury. Words drifted on the breeze. "Can't go on like this," and "if she finds out." Further along, Miss Barrow emerged from a side path, clutching a leather-bound folder under her arm, her steps purposeful and unhurried. She nodded curtly to Miss Marple, but didn't stop, vanishing into the shadows of the Folly's west wing. The air hung heavy, charged with unspoken tensions, as if the house itself held its breath. Walking back to St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple's mind buzzed with fragments, the locket, the whispers, the argument in the garden. It was, she thought, the sort of invitation that promised more than tea, perhaps a puzzle worth unravelling, if only to prevent the snap of that invisible thread she felt tightening around Greenshaw's folly. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Garden. The first light of dawn crept over the rooftops of St. Mary Mead like a hesitant intruder, painting the thatched cottages in soft pinks and golds. But the serenity of the morning was shattered before the church bells could toll 8. Word spread like wildfire through the village lanes. Miss Lavinia Greenshaw had been found dead in her study at Greenshaw's Folly, murdered in the dead of night. The baker's boy, breathless from his rounds, was the first to carry the tale to the high street, where it leapt from shop to shop with the speed of scandal. By the time Miss Marple stirred her tea in her cosy kitchen, the air was thick with speculation. She had slept fitfully, her dreams tangled with images of crimson hair and whispering shadows. The invitation to tea had lingered in her mind like an unfinished melody, and now, as her maid, young Cherry, burst through the door with wide eyes, Miss Marple felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. "Oh, miss, it's dreadful. Miss Greenshaw's been killed," stabbed, they say, right through the heart with her own letter-opener. "Lily Fletcher found her this morning when she went in to light the fires. Screamed the house down, she did." Miss Marple set her cup down carefully, her face a mask of composed concern, though her thoughts raced ahead like a hound on the scent. "Dear me," she murmured, "how very shocking! And poor Lily, such a timid girl. Tell me everything you've heard, Cherry. Leave nothing out." Cherry, ever eager for drama, obliged with relish. The body had been discovered at 7:30, sprawled across the Persian rug in the study, blood staining the embroidered cushions. The room was in chaos, drawers yanked open, papers flung about as if by a tempest. And the will, that infamous document that Lavinia had wielded like a weapon in her endless games of favoritism, was nowhere to be found. Constable Barnes had been summoned at once, but the young officer, more accustomed to lost bicycles than violent death, had paled at the sight and wired for reinforcements from Scotland Yard. By mid-morning, the village was abuzz. Neighbours clustered in doorways, trading theories. A burglar, perhaps, caught in the act. Or one of those disgruntled relatives Lavinia was forever taunting with promises of inheritance. Miss Marple, donning her coat and hat, made her way to the vicarage, where she knew the gossip would flow as freely as the tea. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Price Ridley, was in full flight, her voice rising and falling like a sermon on sin. "Mark my words, it's that secretary, Miss Barrow. Too efficient by half, if you ask me. And those modern girls, with their lipstick and short skirts, no respect for tradition." Miss Marple listened with her usual mild attentiveness, her knitting needles clicking in counterpoint to the chatter. But her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments from her visit the day before. Lavinia's uneasy glances, the argument in the rosebeds, Miss Barrow's purposeful stride. Human nature, she reflected, was like a jigsaw puzzle, each piece seemingly innocuous until fitted into the whole. And murder, that most revealing of acts, often laid bare the hidden flaws in the design. It was Inspector Craddock who interrupted the gathering, arriving in a sleek black car that turned heads along the lane. He was a solid man in his 40s, with a no-nonsense moustache and eyes that missed little, though he often pretended otherwise to put suspects at ease. Miss Marple had crossed paths with him before, during that unfortunate business at the Hydro Hotel, and he had come to value her insights, however reluctantly. Spotting her in the vicarage parlour, he tipped his hat with a wry smile. "Miss Marple, I might have known you'd be at the heart of things. Care to join me at the Folly?" Constable Barnes is holding the fort, but between you and me, he's about as useful as a chocolate teapot in this heat." She accepted with a demure nod, and they drove up the hill in silence, the mansion looming ahead like a sentinel guarding dark secrets. The gates were ajar, flanked by 2 uniformed officers who saluted crisply as Craddock passed. Inside, the house felt oppressively still, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood, and the faint scent of Lavinia's preferred lavender water. Alfred, the butler, met them in the hall, his face ashen beneath its habitual polish. "This way, Inspector." "We've touched nothing, as per instructions. The study was a scene of calculated disarray." Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the horror in stark detail. Lavinia Greenshaw lay on her side near the massive oak desk, her silk dressing gown twisted about her like a shroud. The letter opener, an ornate silver piece with a handle carved like a serpent, protruded from her chest, the wound a dark bloom against the pale fabric. Her eyes, wide and staring, held a final expression of surprise, as if death had caught her mid-thought. Papers littered the floor, letters, bills, scraps of legal jargon. A drawer in the desk hung open, its lock forced with crude efficiency. The safe in the corner stood ajar, empty save for a few dusty ledgers. Craddock knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful as he examined the scene. Time of death around midnight, I'd wager, rigour just setting in. No signs of a struggle beyond the mess here. She knew her attacker, perhaps? Let them in for a late-night chat. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. And that will everyone's talking about. Gone. Motive enough for half the county. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, her eyes taking in every detail with the precision of a cartographer mapping unfamiliar terrain. The desk blotter bore fresh ink stains, suggesting Lavinia had been writing when interrupted. A half-smoked cigarette lay crushed in the ashtray, its brand foreign and expensive, not Lavinia's usual choice. And there, on the windowsill, a faint smudge of soil, as if someone had brushed against it coming or going. "The window," she said softly, pointing. "Was it open when she was found?" Alfred, hovering nearby, shook his head. "Latch tight, miss. Miss Greenshaw was particular about drafts at night." Craddock nodded approvingly. "Good eye, so entry through the door, likely. Let's hear from the household. Start with the one who found her, Lily Fletcher." They moved to the morning room, a brighter space with chintz curtains and vases of wilting roses. Lily sat huddled in an armchair, her hands twisting a sodden handkerchief. She was a mousy woman in her 30s, with faded blonde hair and eyes red from crying. A silk scarf, vividly patterned in blues and golds, was knotted at her throat, an odd luxury against her plain house dress. I came in at 7, like always," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, "to lay the fire and dust." The door was ajar, and there she was. Oh, it was awful. Blood everywhere, and her eyes staring right at me. She shuddered, burying her face in her hands. Craddock's tone was gentle but probing. "Did you hear anything last night?" "Noises? Voices?" Lily hesitated, her gaze flicking to the window. "Nothing unusual. Nat, my husband, was out late in the greenhouse, tending the orchids. I went to bed early, around 10. Miss Barrow was still up typing in her room. And Alfred, he locks up at 11 sharp." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "That scarf, my dear. It's quite lovely. A gift, perhaps." Lily's fingers flew to it, a flush creeping up her neck. From Miss Greenshaw, last week. She said it didn't suit her any more." but her eyes darted away, and Miss Marple noted the lie in the tremor of her voice. People, she thought, were so transparent when flustered, like village children caught with jam on their fingers. Next came Nat Fletcher, the gardener, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a perpetual scowl. He lounged against the doorframe, his boots tracking mud on the carpet, defiance in every line of his body. "I was in the greenhouse till midnight," he grunted. "Orchids need misting. Heard nothing, saw nothing. Miss Greenshaw was alive when I locked the tool shed at 11. Saw her light in the study." Craddock pressed him. "And your wife?" "She mentioned you were out late." Nat's eyes narrowed, avoiding Lily's direction entirely. "Lily sleeps like the dead. Wouldn't hear a thing." There was a bitterness in his tone, an undercurrent of marital discord that hung in the air like smoke. Miss Barrow entered next, a contrast in poise. Tall and slender, with dark hair pinned neatly and a suit that spoke of city sophistication, she sat with the calm of one accustomed to crises. Her face was pale, but her voice steady. "I retired at 10:30, after typing some letters for Miss Greenshaw. She was in good spirits, mentioned rewriting her will again. The latest version favoured Mr. Horace Bindler, her cousin. I believe it's in the safe. Or was." Craddock's eyebrows rose. "You knew the contents?" "As her secretary, yes. She dictated it to me last week, but she changed her mind often. Charities one day, staff the next." Miss Barrow's lips thinned. "If it's missing, someone must have taken it after. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the faint tremor in her hands as she smoothed her skirt. Efficiency could mask much, she knew, like ambition or resentment. And that leather folder from yesterday, what secrets did it hold? Alfred, the butler, was last, his testimony as starched as his collar. "I made my rounds at 11, Inspector. All secure." Miss Greenshaw bid me good night from her study door. No visitors, no calls. His detachment was almost unnatural, as if the murder were a minor inconvenience in his routine. With the interviews done, Craddock dismissed them, turning to Miss Marple as they stepped into the garden for fresh air. The grounds were a riot of colour. Roses climbing trellises, lawns manicured to perfection. But shadows lurked beneath the hedges, where the sun didn't reach. "What do you make of it?" he asked. Miss Marple wandered toward the rose-beds, her steps deliberate. "The letter opener is curious, Inspector. Not a weapon one grabs in haste. It's personal, intimate. Suggests someone close, someone who argued, perhaps, and struck in passion." She paused by a bush, heavy with blooms, her eyes on the gardener's cottage in the distance. Nat was there now, arguing again with Lily through an open window, their voices low but urgent. He avoided her touch, turning away with a sharp gesture. "And look," Miss Marple continued, "Lily's scarf, too fine for her means, a bribe, or stolen, and Miss Barrow, organising those papers already, as if claiming territory." She glanced back at the house, where Miss Barrow could be seen through a window, methodically sorting documents with that same cool precision. Craddock rubbed his chin. "Motives aplenty. The will's the key. If it's destroyed, the previous one stands. I need to speak to the solicitor." As they walked, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a shadow in the garden, a literal one, cast by a sundial near the greenhouse. But it evoked something deeper, the shadow of deceit, stretching across the Folly. She recalled a similar case in her youth, a manor house murder where the secretary had forged documents to secure her future. "People repeat patterns," she murmured, "like seasons in the garden." The afternoon wore on with forensic teams arriving, dusting for prints and photographing the scene. Craddock coordinated with efficiency, but Miss Marple slipped away to explore the grounds further. The greenhouse was a humid haven, filled with exotic blooms under Nat's care. She found him there, clipping stems with savage snips. "Beautiful orchids," she said mildly. "Miss Greenshaw must have appreciated your work." He grunted, not meeting her eyes. She paid well enough. But she was a meddler, always prying into folks' business. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Like marriages? I couldn't help noticing you and Lily seem strained." Nat Shears paused. "None of your concern, miss." But his knuckles whitened, and he turned away, the shadow of the glass panes falling across his face like bars. Returning to the house, Miss Marple overheard Miss Barrow on the telephone in the hall, her voice low. "Yes, the will's gone. I'll handle it. To whom? And why the urgency?" As evening approached, Craddock gathered the household again, announcing preliminary findings. No forced entry, fingerprints everywhere, but nothing conclusive yet. Tension simmered. Lily wept quietly. Nat glowered. Miss Barrow remained impassive. Alfred poured tea with mechanical grace. Miss Marple sat quietly, her mind weaving threads. The soil smudge, the foreign cigarette, the missing will. It was like one of those detective novels her nephew Raymond enjoyed. Clues hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right eye to spot them. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. In one such shadow, near the sundial, Miss Marple noticed a glint, a button perhaps, half buried in the earth. She bent to retrieve it, but a footstep crunching gravel made her straighten. It was Miss Barrow, hurrying toward the cottage, her face set in determination. What errand in the gathering dusk? Craddock joined Miss Marple on the terrace, lighting a pipe. "This place feels cursed," he said, "like it's hiding more than one secret." "Indeed," she replied, "and shadows, Inspector, reveal as much as they conceal. We must watch where they fall." As night enveloped Greenshaw's Folly, the house stood silent, but Miss Marple knew the real storm was brewing within its walls. Murder had cast its shadow, and in its depths the truth lurked, waiting to be dragged into the light. Chapter 3. The Missing Will. The morning after Lavinia Greenshaw's murder, a thin mist clung to the grounds of Greenshaw's Folly, wrapping the mansion in a ghostly veil that seemed to mirror the unease within its walls. St. Mary Mead was no stranger to gossip, but the news of the missing will had ignited a frenzy of speculation. By breakfast, every villager from the postmistress to the milkman had a theory. The document had been stolen to favour a spurned heir, or perhaps destroyed to revert to an earlier draft. Miss Jane Marple, sipping tea in her cottage, listened to Cherry's breathless recounting of the latest rumours with her usual quiet attentiveness, her mind already sifting through the clues like a seamstress sorting threads. The will, she knew, was the heart of this puzzle. Lavinia's habit of rewriting it had been a village legend, each new version a weapon wielded to keep her household in line. Miss Marple recalled a conversation at the Women's Institute, where Mrs. Price Ridley had whispered that Lavinia once threatened to leave her fortune to a cat's home, just to spite a grasping nephew. Now, with the document vanished and a letter opener buried in its mistress's chest, the stakes were clear. Someone had acted to secure, or destroy, their future. Inspector Craddock arrived at Miss Marple's cottage just as the church clock struck 10. His face etched with the weariness of a man who had spent the night wrestling with paperwork and suspects. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a cup of tea with a grateful nod. "The Folly's a hornet's nest. That will's the key, but it's like chasing a ghost. I'm heading back now. Care to join me? Your knack for spotting what we miss might come in handy." She agreed, slipping on her coat and hat, her eyes bright with the prospect of unravelling the tangle. The drive to the Folly was silent, save for the hum of the engine and Craddock's occasional muttering about fingerprints or the lack thereof. "The study's a mess," he said, "but no clear prints on the letter opener, just smudges." Whoever did this was careful. Or lucky, the mansion loomed through the mist, its turrets piercing the sky like the spines of some ancient beast. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the household moving like actors in a play that had taken a deadly turn. Alfred, the butler, greeted them with his usual impassivity, though Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his hands as he took her coat. "Inspector Miss Marple," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The others are in the morning room. Shall I fetch them?" Craddock nodded, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the hall table, where a stack of unopened letters lay beside a vase of fading dahlias. One envelope bore a London postmark, its wax seal broken, a solicitor's crest, she noted. "Recent correspondence?" she asked lightly. Alfred hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Miss Greenshaw's business letters. Miss Barrow's been sorting them since yesterday." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. A secretary's diligence could cover many sins, she thought, recalling a case in St. Mary Mead, where a housekeeper had sorted her employer's papers to hide her own pilfering. She followed Craddock to the study, where the scene remained much as they had left it. Lavinia's body had been removed, but the blood-stained rug and scattered papers bore witness to the violence. The forced drawer and empty safe told their own story, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on a small detail, a single rose petal, crimson and crushed, near the fireplace. It hadn't been there yesterday. Craddock began his interviews with Miss Barrow, who entered with the composure of a governess facing a difficult pupil. Her dark hair was pinned tightly, her suit crisp despite the chaos of the house. "The will was in the safe last I saw it," she said, her voice steady but her fingers clasping a pen with unnecessary force. "Miss Greenshaw dictated it to me 10 days ago. It left the bulk of the estate to Mr. Horace Bindler, her cousin, with smaller bequests to the staff and a local charity. She kept changing her mind, though. Last month it was Nat and Lily who stood to gain." Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "And you? Were you ever in the will?" Miss Barrow's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Once, briefly, for £1,000. She scratched it out when I refused to wear one of her old hats to a village fete. She was whimsical like that." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression mild. "Whimsical, yes. And yet so precise about her papers. You've been organising them already, I see." Most efficient eyeshadow passed over Miss Barrow's face, gone as quickly as it came. "Someone had to. The house doesn't run itself. Even now next came Nat Fletcher, his boots leaving faint traces of soil on the parquet floor. He slumped in a chair, his eyes darting to the window as if longing for escape. "I told you I was in the greenhouse till midnight," he growled. "Didn't see or hear nothing. Miss Greenshaw Was always fussing about her will. Said it kept us on our toes. Maybe someone got tired of dancing. Craddock pressed him on the greenhouse, but Nat's answers were curt, his temper barely leashed. Miss Marple noted the dirt under his nails, fresh and dark, as if he'd been digging recently. She thought of the rose petal. Had it fallen from his clothes, or someone else's? Lily Fletcher was a trembling wreck, her silk scarf now crumpled in her hands like a lifeline. "I didn't touch nothing in the study," she insisted, her voice cracking. "I just saw her and ran screaming to Alfred." "I don't know about the will. Miss Greenshaw never told me nothing like that." But her eyes avoided Miss Marple's, and her fingers twisted the scarf until the fabric strained. Miss Marple spoke gently. "You must have been close to her, my dear, to receive such a fine gift as that scarf. Did she often give you things?" Lily flushed, her voice dropping to a whisper. She said it was a thank you for helping with her flowers." But Nat didn't like it, said it wasn't proper. Her words trailed off, and she glanced nervously toward the door, as if expecting her husband to storm in. Alfred, when questioned, was a study in detachment. "I never saw the will," he said, his hands clasped behind his back. "My duties were to the house, not Miss Greenshaw's private affairs." I locked up at 11, as always, and retired. The staff quarters are far from the study. I heard nothing. Craddock dismissed him, turning to Miss Marple with a frown. "They're all hiding something. Lily's scared stiff, Nat's angry, Miss Barrow's too calm, and Alfred's playing the perfect servant. But no one saw anything. Convenient, that." Miss Marple wandered to the fireplace, her fingers brushing the mantel where the rose petal lay. "Convenient, yes, but people are rarely as careful as they think. This petal, for instance, fresh from the garden. Someone brought it in, perhaps on their shoe or coat." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "And the safe, forced but not crudely. A practiced hand, I'd say Craddock ordered a search of the grounds, focusing on the garden paths leading to the study's windows. Miss Marple accompanied him, her steps slow but purposeful, her mind turning over the household's alibis. The rose beds near the greenhouse were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the damp air. She paused by a patch of earth, slightly disturbed, as if someone had trodden carelessly. Kneeling, she brushed aside leaves to reveal a charred scrap of paper, half buried. She beckoned Craddock over, her voice low. "Look here, Inspector." "A fragment of the will, I suspect." He examined it carefully, noting the looping signature. Lavinia's, unmistakable even in its scorched state. Burned, but not completely. Whoever did this was in a hurry. He bagged the fragment and ordered his men to search further, but the mist was thickening, obscuring smaller clues. Back in the house, Miss Marple requested a tour of Lavinia's private rooms, sensing the answers lay in the personal. The bedroom was a riot of colour, silks and velvets draped over furniture, a vanity cluttered with perfumes and jewelled combs. A locked diary caught her eye, its key missing. "Might we open this?" she asked Craddock. With a nod, he summoned a constable with a lockpick. The diary revealed pages of Lavinia's sprawling handwriting, detailing her suspicions about her household. "Miss B too clever by half," one entry read. "Caught her in my papers last week. Claims it was for filing." "I wonder." Another noted, "Nat's temper grows worse. Lily fears him, I think. Must watch them both." A final entry, dated 2 days before, was chilling. "I've changed the will again. If they knew, there'd be murder done." Craddock's eyes narrowed. She suspected trouble. But why keep it to herself? Miss Marple's lips pursed. Pride, perhaps, or control. She enjoyed wielding power over them, like a chess player moving pawns. She thought of a village spinster years ago who had dangled promises of inheritance to manipulate her nieces, only to die at one's hand. Lavinia played a dangerous game. The afternoon brought a new arrival. Horace Bindler, Lavinia's cousin, summoned by telegram. He was a slight man in his 50s, with ink-stained fingers and the distracted air of a scholar, lost in his books. His tweed suit was rumpled, his glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. "I'm appalled," he said, sinking into a chair in the library. "Lavinia wrote to me last month, hinting at leaving me the Folly. I thought it another of her whims I never expected." His voice broke and he fumbled for a handkerchief. Craddock was sceptical. "Where were you last night, Mr. Bindler?" "In London, at my club. I dined alone, worked on my manuscript till late. No one saw me after 10, I'm afraid." His alibi was flimsy, but Miss Marple sensed no guile in him. He was, she thought, too nervous for murder, more likely a pawn than a knight. As evening fell, Miss Marple lingered in the library, ostensibly browsing Lavinia's collection of Gothic novels. But her eyes followed Miss Barrow, who was sorting papers with a speed that bordered on frantic. A ledger slipped from her hands, revealing a sheet of shorthand notes, unreadable to most, but Miss Marple recognized the cipher from her days helping a vicar decode parish records. She made a mental note to ask Craddock for a closer look. Outside, the mist had lifted, revealing the garden in stark clarity. Miss Marple strolled toward the greenhouse, where Nat was pruning roses with savage precision. "Such lovely blooms," she said, her tone conversational. "Miss Greenshaw must have trusted you implicitly with her gardens." He grunted, his shears snipping a thorn stem. She trusted no one. Always poking about, asking questions. Made Lily nervous as a cat. "And you?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Did her questions trouble you?" Nat's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, turning back to his work. Miss Marple noted a fresh scratch on his hand, red and raw. From thorns or something sharper? Back in the house, Craddock shared news from the solicitor. The previous will, lodged in London, favoured a local orphanage with modest sums for Nat, Lily, and Alfred. Miss Barrow had been excluded entirely. "If the new will's gone," Craddock mused, "the old one stands. But why destroy it unless the new one was worse for someone?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind circling the rose petal, the charred paper, the diary's warnings. "Someone wanted to control the game," she said, "but they've left tracks, small ones, but clear to those who look." She thought of Miss Barrow's shorthand, Lily's scarf, Nat's scratch. Each was a thread, and the pattern was forming, though not yet complete. As night fell, the Folly seemed to close in on itself, its shadows deeper, its silences heavier. Miss Marple sat by the library fire, her knitting in her lap, but her eyes were on the household. Miss Barrow's quick glances, Lily's trembling hands, Nat's sullen retreat to the cottage. The missing will was more than paper. It was a motive, a map to the killer's heart. And in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple knew, even the smallest village held secrets as dark as any cities. Chapter 4. The Gardener's Wife. The third day after Lavinia Greenshaw's murder dawned crisp and clear, the mist that had shrouded Greenshaw's Folly lifting to reveal a landscape sharp with autumn's edge. St. Mary Mead hummed with whispers, the villagers' theories growing wilder with each retelling. a vengeful relative, a secret lover, even a ghostly curse tied to the Folly's Gothic stones. Miss Jane Marple, however, paid little heed to such fancies. Seated in her garden with a cup of Darjeeling, she turned the facts over in her mind, her knitting needles clicking like the gears of a well-oiled clock. The missing will, the rose petal, the charred fragment, the diary's cryptic warnings, all pointed to a truth buried beneath layers of deception, like a bulb waiting for spring. Her thoughts kept returning to Lily Fletcher, the gardener's wife, whose nervous demeanour and incongruous silk scarf had struck a discordant note. Lily's fear was palpable, her answers evasive, and that scarf, a gift she claimed from Lavinia, seemed less a token of affection than a clue to something deeper. Miss Marple knew from long experience that fear often betrayed guilt, or at least knowledge, and she resolved to probe further. A quiet chat, she thought, away from the oppressive shadow of the Folly, might loosen Lily's tongue. Inspector Craddock telephoned just after breakfast, his voice taut with frustration. "We've hit a wall, Miss Marple. The solicitors confirmed the old will's in play unless we find the new one, but no one's talking. I'm heading to the Folly to re-interview the staff. Care to join me? Or are you brewing one of your theories already?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'll come along, Inspector. A fresh perspective never hurts." She gathered her hat and coat, her mind already mapping the day's inquiries. Lily would be her focus, but she'd keep an eye on Miss Barrow's cool efficiency and Nat's simmering temper. And Horace Bindler, the nervous cousin, his role in this chess game was still unclear. The Folly was a hive of subdued activity when they arrived. Constables moved through the grounds, searching for overlooked clues, while the household went through the motions of routine, their faces drawn with strain. Alfred, the butler, greeted them with his usual formality, though Miss Marple noted a faint sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool morning. "The morning room, Inspector," he said, leading them through halls that echoed with the weight of recent violence. Craddock began with Miss Barrow, whose composure remained unshaken. She sat primly, her hands folded, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "I've told you everything," she said, her tone clipped. "Miss Greenshaw was in the study when I left her at 10. I heard nothing, saw nothing. The will was in the safe, as I said. If it's gone, it's not my doing." Craddock leaned forward, his pencil tapping his notebook. "You are close to her affairs, Miss Barrow." Any enemies she mentioned? Anyone who might have wanted her dead? Miss Barrow's lips tightened. She was a difficult woman, demanding, changeable. The staff grumbled, Nat especially, when she criticized his roses. But enemies? No one specific. Her gaze flicked to Miss Marple, who was studying a framed botanical print with apparent innocence. "Miss Greenshaw trusted me implicitly." Miss Marple's eyes flicked up, catching the faint challenge in Miss Barrow's tone. "Trust is a curious thing," she murmured. "It's often given where it's least deserved." She thought of a village seamstress who had trusted her apprentice, only to find her savings pilfered. Miss Barrow's efficiency, she suspected, hid more than it revealed. Next came Nat Fletcher, his boots cleaner today, but his scowl unchanged. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, as if daring Craddock to accuse him. "I was in the cottage by midnight," he said. "Lily was asleep. I didn't go near the study. Why would I? Miss Greenshaw's will was her business, not mine." Craddock pressed him on the charred paper found near the greenhouse. Nat's eyes narrowed. "Plenty of rubbish gets burned around here. Garden clippings, old letters. Don't mean I touched her precious will," Miss Marple interjected softly. "Your wife seems troubled, mister. Fletcher, that scarf she wears, it's quite striking for a gardener's wife." "A gift," she said. Nat's jaw clenched, and he looked away. "Lily's business, not mine. Ask her." His abruptness was a shield, but Miss Marple saw cracks in it, anger perhaps, or fear of his own. Lily was summoned next, her steps hesitant, her hands clutching the scarf as if it might anchor her. She sat on the edge of a chair, her eyes darting between Craddock and Miss Marple, like a cornered animal's. "I've told you everything," she whispered. "I found her, that's all." "I didn't touch the will or nothing." Craddock's tone was gentle, but firm. "Lily, we found a piece of the will, burned, near the greenhouse. Any idea how it got there?" Her face paled, and she shook her head violently. "No, I don't know nothing about that. I stay out of the garden at night. Nat's particular about his plants." Her voice broke, and tears welled up, spilling onto the scarf. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soothing. "My dear, you're frightened." "It's only natural after such a shock, but sometimes sharing what you know can ease the burden. Did you see anyone near the study that night? Or perhaps near the greenhouse?" Lily's fingers twisted the scarf, and her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. I saw Miss Barrow. Late, after 10. She was by the greenhouse, carrying something, a bundle, like papers. She said it was old letters for burning, but she looked strange, scared, maybe." She glanced at the door, as if expecting Miss Barrow to appear. "Please, don't tell her I said so. She's got a way of making you feel small." Craddock's eyebrows rose, but Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "You've done well to tell us, Lily." Secrets have a way of festering. She thought of a young maid in St. Mary Mead, who had seen her employer's lover sneaking out at dawn, but kept silent out of fear, only for tragedy to follow. Lily's confession was a crack in the case, but it needed careful handling. After Lily was dismissed, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "Miss Barrow again. She's in deep, too deep for just a secretary. But Lily's scared of more than just her. That husband of hers, he's got a temper." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the greenhouse, the charred paper, and Lily's trembling hands. "Fear can be a motive, Inspector, or a cage. Lily's trapped, I think, between loyalty and dread. And Miss Barrow, she's playing a part, but not perfectly." Determined to probe further, Miss Marple proposed a visit to the gardener's cottage, ostensibly to admire Nat's roses, but really to observe Lily in her own domain. Craddock agreed, and they walked through the gardens, where the air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and fading blooms. The cottage was small but tidy, its windows adorned with lace curtains that fluttered in the breeze. Lily answered the door, her face pale but composed, and invited them in, says with a nervous smile. The sitting-room was modest, with a worn rug and a single photograph on the mantel. A younger Lily and Nat, smiling on their wedding day. Though even then, Nat's grip on her arm seemed tight. Miss Marple complimented the roses visible through the window, steering the conversation to gardening. "You must help your husband often, Lily. Such lovely flowers require a gentle hand." Lily blushed, her hands fidgeting. "I try, miss, but Nat's particular. Doesn't like me meddling with his tools or his greenhouse." Her voice faltered, and she glanced at the door, where Nat could be seen in the distance, digging near the orchard. Miss Marple's eyes softened. It must be hard, living so close to the Folly. All those secrets, those tensions. Did Miss Greenshaw ever confide in you, my dear? About her will, perhaps, or her fears? Lily hesitated, then shook her head. She was kind sometimes, but distant. Gave me the scarf after I helped with her roses one day. Said it suited me better. Her fingers brushed the silk, and Miss Marple noted the way her eyes lingered on it, as if it held a story she dared not tell. Craddock, less patient, pressed her. You saw Miss Barrow by the greenhouse, you said. Did you see her burn anything, or hide something? Lily's breath caught, and she shook her head again, more forcefully. No, I swear. I just saw her with the bundle. Then she went back to the house. I didn't follow. I was afraid. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and Miss Marple saw the fear in her eyes, not just of Miss Barrow, but of something or someone closer. As they left the cottage, Miss Marple paused by the orchard, where Nat was turning soil with a spade. The earth was freshly disturbed, more than necessary for planting, and she filed the observation away. He's hiding something, she murmured to Craddock, or protecting someone. Back at the Folly, Craddock summoned Horace Bindler for another interview. The cousin arrived looking more dishevelled than before, his glasses fogged with nervous sweat. I've told you, Inspector, I was in London, he stammered. I had no idea Lavinia was planning to leave me the Folly until her letter arrived last month. She said it was to protect the estate from unworthy hands. I thought she meant the staff. Perhaps Craddock's eyes narrowed. And you didn't think to visit? To discuss this sudden generosity? Horace fidgeted, his fingers twisting a worn cuff. Lavinia was unpredictable. I assumed she'd change her mind again. She always did. His voice held a mix of resignation and relief, and Miss Marple sensed he was no killer, just a man caught in a game he didn't understand. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple slipped into the library, where Miss Barrow was cataloguing Lavinia's papers with meticulous care. A ledger lay open, its pages filled with shorthand notes. Miss Marple recognized the system from her days assisting a local solicitor. She approached, her tone casual. Such a lot of work, Miss Barrow. Did Miss Greenshaw teach you her shorthand? Miss Barrow's hand paused and she smiled thinly. No, I learned it at secretarial school. It's useful for keeping things private. Her eyes held Miss Marple's for a moment, a challenge beneath the politeness. Miss Marple nodded, undeterred. Very wise. Privacy is so important, especially in a house like this. She thought of a village typist who had used shorthand to conceal her affair, only to be undone by a careless note. Miss Barrow's notes, she suspected, held more than routine correspondence. That evening, Craddock shared new findings. A jeweller's receipt found in Lavinia's bedroom for a sapphire brooch valued at several £100. It's missing, he said. Could be a motive. Robbery turned deadly. But why take the will and not the cash in her desk? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Because the will was the prize, Inspector. The brooch might be a distraction, or a payment. She thought of Lily's scarf, Nat's scratched hand, Miss Barrow's shorthand. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still blurred. As night fell, Miss Marple walked the grounds alone, her shawl drawn tight against the chill. The greenhouse glowed faintly, Nat's silhouette moving within. She paused by the orchard, where the disturbed earth seemed to whisper of secrets buried deep. Lily's fear, she realized, was the key, not just to the murder, but to the web of lies spun around it. The gardener's wife knew more than she dared say, and Miss Marple resolved to free her from that cage before the shadow in the garden claimed another victim. Chapter 5. The Disguise Unravelled. The 5th day since Lavinia Greenshaw's murder broke over St. Mary Mead with a sky so blue it seemed to mock the darkness that clung to Greenshaw's Folly. The village was restless, its usual rhythms disrupted by the weight of unsolved crime. Gossip had taken on a feverish edge, with theories ranging from a spurned lover to a long-lost heir lurking in the shadows of the mansion's turrets. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlour with her knitting untouched, sifted through the clues that had accumulated like leaves in an autumn storm. The charred will fragment, the rose petal, Lily's trembling confession, Miss Barrow's guarded shorthand, all were threads in a tapestry that was beginning to reveal its pattern. But it was the human element, the interplay of fear and ambition, that held her attention most keenly. Her thoughts circled back to Lily Fletcher, whose fear seemed to stem not only from the murder, but from something or someone closer to home. The silk scarf, the nervous glances, the whispered admission about Miss Barrow near the greenhouse, these were not the actions of a woman at ease. And Miss Barrow herself, with her cool efficiency and cryptic notes, was a figure too polished to be entirely innocent. Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth, a vicar's daughter who had masqueraded as a maid to pilfer her employer's jewels, her disguise unravelling only when a neighbour recognised her laugh. Disguise, she mused, was often less about appearance than behaviour, and she sensed a performance unfolding at the Folly. Inspector Craddock arrived at her cottage just before noon, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to yield. "We're chasing shadows, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a cup of tea with a weary nod. "The lab confirmed the burned paper is part of the will, but it's too damaged to read beyond Lavinia's signature. No prints on the letter opener, no sign of the sapphire brooch. And the household, every one of them's holding something back. I'm starting to think we'll need a miracle." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Not a miracle, Inspector, just observation. People betray themselves in the smallest ways. A word, a glance, a moment's hesitation. Shall we return to the Folly? I'd like to speak with Lily again, and perhaps take a closer look at Miss Barrow's papers." Craddock agreed, and they drove up the hill, the mansion's Gothic silhouette stark against the bright sky. The grounds were quieter now, the constables' searches scaled back, but the air held a taut expectancy, as if the house itself awaited the next act. Alfred met them at the door, his usual composure fraying at the edges. Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his voice as he announced, "Miss Barrow is in the library, Inspector. Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher are in the garden. Mr. Bindler arrived an hour ago. He's in the drawing-room." They began with Horace Bindler, who sat hunched over a cup of coffee, his tweed suit more rumpled than ever. His glasses slipped down his nose as he spoke, his voice a mix of agitation and bewilderment. "I've been thinking, Inspector, about Lavinia's letter. She wrote of protecting the estate, but she also mentioned a threat within. I assumed she meant the staff, but now I wonder if she knew someone was plotting against her." Craddock's pencil paused. "A threat within? Did she name anyone?" Horace shook his head, his fingers twisting a handkerchief. No, she was vague, as always. But she seemed uneasy. I should have come sooner, but I thought it was just her dramatics. His voice cracked, and Miss Marple saw genuine grief in his eyes, though she wondered if guilt lurked beneath it. A pawn, she thought, but perhaps one who knew more than he let on. They moved to the library, where Miss Barrow was sorting papers with her usual precision, her dark hair pinned tightly, her suit immaculate. She looked up as they entered, her expression cool, but her eyes wary. "Inspector, Miss Marple, I'm cataloguing Miss Greenshaw's correspondence, as requested by the solicitor. It's a tedious task, but necessary." Craddock nodded, his tone deceptively casual. "Found anything interesting?" "Say, another copy of the will?" Miss Barrow's lips thinned. "No, Inspector. The will was in the safe, as I told you. If it's gone, someone took it after I left her that night." Her fingers brushed a stack of shorthand notes, and Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Those notes," Miss Marple said, her voice mild, "they must be quite confidential, written in shorthand." A clever system for keeping secrets. Miss Barrow's hand stilled, and she met Miss Marple's eyes with a faint smile. "A secretary's tool, nothing more." Miss Greenshaw valued privacy, especially for her financial matters. But there was a flicker of unease in her posture, and Miss Marple filed it away, like a card slipped into a catalogue. Leaving Miss Barrow to her work, they ventured into the garden, where Nat Fletcher was pruning hedges with a ferocity that suggested he was battling more than overgrown branches. Lily stood nearby, weeding a flower bed, her silk scarf tied loosely around her neck. Her hands trembled as she pulled at dandelions, and she flinched when Nat's shears snapped too close. Miss Marple approached her gently, her tone that of a kindly aunt. "Such a lovely day for gardening, Lily. You must find it soothing after all that's happened." Lily's eyes darted to Nat, then back to Miss Marple. It keeps me busy, miss. I don't like to think too much." Her voice was barely audible, and she glanced at the greenhouse, where the charred will fragment had been found. Craddock, less patient, stepped forward. "Lily, you mentioned seeing Miss Barrow by the greenhouse that night. Can you recall anything else? The bundle she carried, what did it look like?" Lily's fingers tightened on the scarf, and she swallowed hard. "It was dark, sir. Just a bundle, like papers tied with string. She was in a hurry, didn't stop to talk. I went back to the cottage after that." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple saw the fear in her eyes, not just of Miss Barrow, but of Nat, who had paused his pruning to listen. Miss Marple's mind raced. Lily's fear was a thread that connected the greenhouse, the scarf, and Miss Barrow's nocturnal errand. She recalled a village scandal where a wife had covered for her husband's theft, terrified of his temper. Was Lily protecting Nat, or someone else? "You're very brave to tell us, my dear," she said softly. "It's hard to speak out when you're afraid." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded mutely, turning back to her weeding. Nat's gaze followed them as they walked away, his expression unreadable, but his grip on the shears white-knuckled. Back in the house, Miss Marple requested access to Lavinia's study, which Craddock granted with a nod. The room was less chaotic now, the papers neatly stacked by Miss Barrow's hand, but the blood-stained rug remained a grim reminder. Miss Marple's eyes swept the space, lingering on the fireplace where the rose petal had caught her attention days ago. She moved to the desk, her fingers brushing the blotter still marked with ink stains. A small drawer, tucked beneath the writing surface, caught her eye. Its lock was subtle, easily overlooked. "Inspector," she said, "might we open this?" Craddock summoned a constable with a lockpick, and the drawer yielded with a soft click. Inside was a single letter-sheet envelope marked with a private investigator's crest. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully, her heart quickening as she read, "Miss Greenshaw, per your request, I've investigated Miss Clara Barrow. Her references are fabricated. Her real name is Clara Henshaw. With a history of fraud in Bristol and London, proceed with caution." The date was 3 weeks old. Craddock's eyes widened. "Clara Henshaw! So Miss Barrow's a fraud. That changes everything." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "It explains Lavinia's unease, her talk of disloyalty." She suspected Miss Barrow, but kept her on, perhaps to watch her or to trap her. She thought of a village postmistress who had played a similar game, baiting a thief with false valuables, only to meet a tragic end. "Clara Henshaw," she murmured, "has much to answer for." The discovery galvanized Craddock, who ordered Miss Barrow brought to the drawing-room for questioning. She entered with her usual poise, but her eyes flicked to the letter in Craddock's hand, and a muscle twitched in her jaw. "Miss Barrow, or should I say Miss Henshaw?" Craddock began, his voice hard. "Care to explain why you lied about your identity?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Miss Barrow's composure cracked, her hands clenching in her lap. I changed my name to escape a mistake in my past. A youthful indiscretion, nothing more. Miss Greenshaw knew and forgave me. I was loyal to her." "Loyal?" Craddock pressed. "She hired an investigator to expose you. And you were seen near the greenhouse the night she died, with a bundle of papers. Care to explain that?" Miss Barrow's eyes flashed. "Lily's lying. I was in my room all night. As for the investigator, Lavinia was paranoid. She suspected everyone. I had no reason to harm her, but her voice trembled, and Miss Marple saw the lie in the way her fingers tightened, as if grasping for control. Miss Marple spoke softly, her tone disarming. "Loyalty is a heavy burden, Miss Barrow. Did Lavinia threaten to expose you? Or was it the will? Did you know it no longer favoured you?" Miss Barrow's face paled, but she said nothing, her silence louder than words. Craddock dismissed her, his expression grim. "She's hiding something, but we need more than Lily's word to pin her down." Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a village fete scheduled that afternoon, a perfect opportunity to observe the household away from the Folly's stifling walls. She persuaded Craddock to attend, suggesting it might loosen tongues or reveal alliances. The fete was a riot of colour and noise, with stalls selling jams and knitted scarves, children darting through the crowd, and a brass band playing off-key. Miss Marple mingled with the villagers, her eyes sharp beneath her demure hat. Lily was there, helping at a flower stall, her scarf knotted tightly as if to ward off scrutiny. Nat stood apart, glowering at a group of lads who had trampled his prize dahlias. Horace wandered aimlessly, his nose buried in a book, oblivious to the stares. But it was Miss Barrow who drew Miss Marple's attention, transformed in a floral dress that softened her usual severity. She laughed with a group of women, her voice bright. But there was something in her posture, the tilt of her head, the cadence of her laugh, that sparked a memory. Miss Marple slipped away to the Follies' library, where she had glimpsed a photograph during her first visit. Lavinia, younger, standing beside a woman who could have been her sister. The resemblance to Miss Barrow in her foot attire was striking, not in features, but in manner, as if she had studied Lavinia's gestures and adopted them. Disguise, Miss Marple thought, was not always a wig or a false name. Sometimes it was a borrowed laugh, a mimicked grace. Returning to the fete, she watched Miss Barrow closely, noting how she avoided Lily, who seemed to shrink in her presence. Nat, meanwhile, hovered near his wife, his eyes dark with unspoken anger. Horace, cornered by Mrs. Price Ridley, looked desperate to escape. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle needed one final nudge. That evening, Miss Marple shared her theory with Craddock over tea in the Follies' morning room. "Suppose," she said, her voice low, "Miss Barrow killed Lavinia to protect her secret identity. She took the will, knowing it exposed her fraud, and burned it near the greenhouse. But to confuse the timeline, she disguised herself as Lily, wearing her scarf, perhaps her coat, and slipped out as the gardener's wife. Lily's fear is not just of Nat, but of Miss Barrow, who may have threatened her into silence." Craddock's brow furrowed. "Disguised as Lily? That's bold, but it fits. Lily's scarf, her nerves, Miss Barrow's presence at the greenhouse. We need to test it." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming. "A trap, Inspector. Let's see who takes the bait." She thought of a village grocer who had caught a thief by spreading a false rumour about hidden gold. Human nature, she knew, was as predictable as the seasons, and greed or fear would always betray the guilty. As night fell, the Follies' shadows deepened, but Miss Marple felt a spark of certainty. The disguise was unravelling, and the truth, like a buried bulb, was ready to break through. Chapter 6. The Trap is Sprung. The 6th day after Lavinia Greenshaw's murder draped Saint. Mary Mead in a restless hush, as if the village itself held its breath, awaiting the unmasking of a killer. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fading roses, but at Greenshaw's Folly, the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of tension. Electric, brittle, like the moment before a storm breaks. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting idle in her lap, her mind weaving together the threads of the case. The charred will fragment, the rose petal, Lily's trembling confession, Miss Barrow's hidden past as Clara Henshaw, and that uncanny laugh at the fate, so reminiscent of Lavinia herself. The pattern was nearly complete, but it required one final move, a trap to draw the guilty into the open. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Inspector Craddock stood on the threshold, his face a mixture of determination and fatigue. "We're close, Miss Marple," he said, stepping inside. "That letter about Clara Henshaw changes everything, but we need proof. Something solid to tie her to the murder. Your idea about a disguise. It's clever, but risky. Got any thoughts on how to flush her out?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "A trap, Inspector, is like a well-placed question. It provokes a reaction. If Miss Barrow believes the will has been found, one that threatens her plans, she'll act. People, you see, cannot resist protecting their secrets." She recalled a village scandal where a shopkeeper's wife, caught pilfering, had betrayed herself by rushing to hide stolen goods when a false rumour spread. "We must make her think the game is up." Craddock nodded, his expression thoughtful. "A fake will, then. We announce it's been found, see who panics. But we'll need to be careful. Miss Barrow's sharp and Nat's volatile, and Lily, she's a wild card. Miss Marple agreed, and they devised a plan over tea, the details as precise as a chess gambit. Craddock would return to the Folly and gather the household, claiming a new will had been discovered in a hidden compartment in Lavinia's library. The document, he would say, named Horace Bindler as the sole heir, cutting out the staff entirely. Miss Marple would watch from the sidelines, her unassuming presence perfect for catching the subtle tells of guilt. A glance, a tremor, a too-quick denial. They drove to the Folly as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawns, the mansion's turrets looming like silent sentinels. The household was summoned to the drawing-room, a cavernous space where Lavinia's portrait stared down with accusing eyes. Alfred, the butler, stood by the door, his face as impassive as ever, though Miss Marple noted a slight tightening of his jaw. Nat Fletcher slouched in a corner, his hands thrust into his pockets, his eyes darting to his wife Lily, who sat hunched, her silk scarf knotted tightly at her throat. Horace Bindler fidgeted with his glasses, looking more like a startled owl than an heir. Miss Barrow entered last, her suit crisp, her expression a mask of calm, but her fingers betrayed her, clutching a pencil with unnecessary force. Craddock stood before the fireplace, his demeanour authoritative, yet tinged with theatrical gravitas. A touch Miss Marple had suggested to heighten the tension. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. "We've made a significant discovery. A new will, hidden in a secret compartment in Miss Greenshaw's library, has come to light. It names Mr. Horace Bindler as the sole beneficiary of the estate, with no provisions for the staff or others. We're verifying its authenticity, but it appears to be the final document Miss Greenshaw drafted." The room stilled, the air thick with unspoken reactions. Horace's mouth fell open, his glasses slipping further down his nose. "Me? Sole heir? But I never expected—" His voice trailed off, and Miss Marple noted the genuine shock in his eyes, though she wondered if it masked relief. Lily's hands trembled, and she glanced at Nat, who muttered something under his breath, his face darkening. Alfred's expression remained unreadable, but his fingers twitched, as if resisting the urge to adjust his collar. Miss Barrow, however, was the one to watch. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "That's surprising," she said, her voice steady but her pencil snapping in her hand. "Miss Greenshaw was unpredictable, but I didn't know she'd finalized anything so drastic." Craddock's gaze swept the room. "We'll need to interview each of you again in light of this. If anyone knows anything about this will, or why it was hidden, now's the time to speak." The announcement had the desired effect. A ripple of unease, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Miss Marple watched closely as the household dispersed, noting Miss Barrow's quick exit toward the library, her steps brisk but not quite composed. Lily lingered, her eyes darting to the door, as if torn between fleeing and confessing. Nat followed her, his hand brushing her arm in a way that made her flinch. Horace remained, muttering about consulting his solicitor, while Alfred began clearing the tea tray with mechanical precision. Miss Marple slipped into the library, ostensibly to browse Lavinia's collection, but her real purpose was to observe Miss Barrow. The secretary was already there, rifling through a stack of papers with a speed that bordered on desperation. A ledger fell to the floor, revealing more shorthand notes, dense, cryptic, and, Miss Marple suspected, incriminating. She approached, her voice gentle. "Such a lot of work, Miss Barrow. You must feel the weight of it all, with Miss Greenshaw gone." Miss Barrow started, her hand freezing mid-page. "It's my duty," she said, her tone clipped. "Someone has to keep order." But her eyes betrayed her, flicking to the door as if expecting an interruption. Miss Marple nodded, her expression disarming. "Order is so comforting, isn't it?" "Like a well-kept garden, but secrets, like weeds, have a way of sprouting." She thought of a village librarian who had hidden her thefts in coded ledgers, undone by a single misplaced entry. Miss Barrow's shorthand, she sensed, held the key to more than correspondence. As evening approached, Craddock stationed constables discreetly around the Folly, ready to act on any suspicious movement. Miss Marple suggested they keep a close eye on the library, suspecting Miss Barrow might return to destroy or retrieve something incriminating. Sure enough, as dusk settled over the grounds, a light flickered in the library window. Craddock and Miss Marple crept closer, peering through the glass to see Miss Barrow at the desk. A small fire burning in the grate. She was feeding papers into the flames, her movements frantic, her face illuminated by the glow. Craddock burst in, his voice sharp. "Miss Barrow, or should I say Miss Henshaw?" "Step away from the fire." She froze, a sheet of paper crumpling in her hand. Her composure shattered, her voice rising in a mix of defiance and fear. "You've no right. These are just old notes, nothing to do with the will." But Craddock was swift, snatching the paper before it could burn. It was a draft of the will, in Lavinia's handwriting, with annotations in Miss Barrow's shorthand, changes that favoured her significantly. "This looks like motive," Craddock said, his tone grim. "Care to explain?" Miss Barrow's shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to drain from her. I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Lavinia found out about my past, Clara Henshaw, the fraud. She threatened to expose me, to cut me from the will entirely. We argued that night in the study. She was so angry, waving that letter opener, I grabbed it, and before I knew it—" She choked on a sob covering her face. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft but unrelenting. "And the will? You took it, didn't you? Burned it to cover your tracks?" Miss Barrow nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I forged a new draft, one that gave me enough to start over. I burned the real one near the greenhouse, but I couldn't find all the pieces. And Lily's scarf, I borrowed it, wore it to slip out as her, so no one would suspect me leaving the study. I told her to keep quiet, said I'd make sure Nat got blamed if she talked." Craddock's eyes hardened. "You threatened her into silence." "And the sapphire brooch?" "Hidden in my room," Miss Barrow admitted, her voice barely audible. "I was going to sell it, start fresh somewhere new." Craddock signalled to a constable, who led Miss Barrow away, her wrists cuffed, her head bowed. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the dying fire. Miss Marple gazed at the flames, her mind replaying the confession. It fit like the final piece of a jigsaw, but one detail nagged at her. Lily's fear. Was it all due to Miss Barrow's threats, or was there more to Nat's role than he'd admitted? They found Lily in the gardener's cottage, sitting alone, her scarf discarded on the table. She looked up as they entered, her eyes red but resolute. "You got her then?" she whispered. "Miss Barrow." Craddock nodded. "She confessed, Lily. You're safe now, but why didn't you? Tell us everything? About the scarf? Her threats?" Lily's hands twisted together. "She scared me, sir. Said she'd make it look like Nat did it. Planted things in the greenhouse, papers and such. And Nat, he's got a temper. I didn't want him in trouble." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple saw the weight of her silence, born out of love and fear. "And Nat?" Miss Marple asked gently. "Did he know anything?" Lily shook her head. "He suspected I was hiding something, but I'd never told him. He's been angry, thinking I was keeping secrets for someone else." Her eyes filled with tears, and Miss Marple patted her hand, thinking of a village wife who had protected her husband from ruin, only to lose her own peace. Craddock summoned Nat, who arrived with a scowl, his hands still dusted with soil. "What's this about? You've got your killer, haven't you?" "We do," Craddock said, "but we need to clear up your movements that night. Lily says you were in the greenhouse. Any chance you saw Miss Barrow there?" Nat's eyes narrowed, but he shook his head. "I told you, I was tending orchids. Didn't see her. If Lily says different, she's mistaken." But his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted the way his gaze avoided his wife's. As they left the cottage, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of relief and exasperation. "That's it, then. Clara Henshaw, Miss Barrow, killed Lavinia, stole the will, and framed her escape. But I can't shake the feeling we're missing something." Miss Marple nodded, her mind lingering on Nat's evasiveness, Lily's fear, and the rose petal that had first caught her eye. "The main thread is tied, Inspector, but there are loose ends. Nat's temper, for instance. He may not have killed, but he knows more than he says. And Lily, she's been protecting him, I think, as much as herself." They returned to the Folly, where Horace Bindler awaited them, his relief palpable. "So it's over. The estate, it's mine?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. Craddock confirmed that the solicitor had located the original will in London, naming Horace as the primary heir, with provisions for local charities. "You'll need to meet with them," he said, "but it's yours, barring any surprises." As night fell, Miss Marple stood on the Folly's terrace, gazing at the gardens where shadows danced in the moonlight. The trap had worked, unravelling Miss Barrow's disguise and her crime, but the case left a faint unease, like a melody unresolved. She thought of a village girl who had confessed to theft to protect a loved one, only to find the truth more complex. Nat and Lily's marriage, she suspected, held its own secrets, ones that might never come to light, but would shape their future. The Folly stood silent, its turrets dark against the sky, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy for Lavinia, whose games of power had ended in a tragedy. The truth had been caught, but the shadows in the garden lingered, whispering of human frailties that no trap could fully ensnare. Chapter 7. The Folly's Legacy. The 7th day after Lavinia Greenshaw's murder brought a deceptive calm to St. Mary Mead, as if the village exhaled after the storm of suspicion and revelation. The sun hung low, gilding the thatched roofs and casting long shadows across the lanes, where whispers of the Folly's tragedy still lingered. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles idle, her mind turning over the case like a gardener inspecting a newly turned bed. Clara Henshaw, known as Miss Barrow, had confessed, her web of deceit unravelled by the trap sprung in the library. The missing will, the stolen sapphire brooch, the borrowed scarf, all had pointed to her guilt. Yet, As Miss Marple sipped her tea, a faint unease prickled at the edges of her thoughts. The puzzle was complete, but some pieces felt slightly askew, like a picture hung just off-centre. The village was abuzz with the news of Clara's arrest. At the post office, Mrs. Price Ridley held court, declaring she'd always suspected that city girl with her airs. The baker's boy spun tales of secret passages and midnight plots, while older villagers nodded sagely, murmuring about the Folly's cursed history. Miss Marple listened to Cherry's recounting of the gossip with her usual patience, but her thoughts were elsewhere, lingering on Lily Fletcher's fear, Nat's sullen silences, and the rose petal that had first caught her eye in the study. Clara's confession had tied the main threads, but the garden, she felt, held secrets yet to bloom. Inspector Craddock telephoned at mid-morning, his voice weary but satisfied. "It's wrapped up, Miss Marple. Clara Henshaw's in custody, charged with murder and theft. The sapphire brooch was found in her room, hidden in a hollowed-out book, clever, but not clever enough. The solicitors confirmed the original will, lodged in London, is valid. Horace Bindler gets the Folly, with bequests to local charities. I'm heading to the village hall to brief the press. Care to join me? Or are you still sniffing out loose ends?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "I'll come along, Inspector. A case like this leaves echoes, and I'd like to hear how the village takes it." She donned her coat and hat, her mind already sifting through the lingering questions. Clara's motive, fear of exposure and greed for the estate, was clear, but Lily's terror and Nat's evasiveness suggested a subplot, a shadow play beneath the main drama. She recalled a village seamstress who had confessed to theft to shield her brother, only for the truth to reveal a deeper betrayal. Human nature, she thought, was rarely as tidy as a police report. The village hall was crowded, with locals packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mix of curiosity and indignation. Craddock stood at the Yesby podium, his moustache bristling as he recounted the case. Lavinia's murder by letter-opener, the stolen will, Clara's forged identity as Miss Barrow, and her attempt to frame her escape by impersonating Lily. "Miss Henshaw acted out of desperation," he said, his voice steady. "She forged a new will to secure her future, killed Miss Greenshaw when confronted, and used Mrs. Fletcher's scarf to create a false alibi, thanks to diligent police work and some keen observation." He nodded toward Miss Marple, prompting murmurs from the crowd. "We've brought her to justice." Questions flew from the audience, mostly about the will and the Folly's future. Horace Bindler, seated near the front, looked overwhelmed, his glasses fogged with nervous sweat. "I plan to turn the Folly into a museum," he stammered when pressed. "Lavinia loved its history, its oddities. I'll honour that his sincerity drew nods, though Miss Marple noted a flicker of doubt in his eyes, as if he feared the mansion's shadows. After the briefing, Miss Marple lingered, chatting with villagers to gauge their reactions. Mrs. Price Ridley cornered her, her voice shrill. "I knew that secretary was trouble, too polished, too perfect." "But what about the Fletchers? That Nat's got a temper, and Lily's no better, always skulking about. Mark my words, they're not innocent." Miss Marple nodded politely, her mind elsewhere. Mrs. Price Ridley's suspicions, though exaggerated, echoed her own unease. Lily's silence had protected Clara. But what else had it concealed? And Nat, his scratched hand, his late-night greenhouse visits, suggested knowledge, if not complicity. She resolved to visit the Folly one last time, to tie up those loose ends before they frayed further. Craddock drove her up the hill, the mansion's turrets piercing the sky like accusatory fingers. The grounds were quiet, the constables gone, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a rook. Alfred greeted them at the door, his composure restored, but his eyes shadowed. "Mr. Bindler is in the library, Inspector. The Fletchers are in their cottage. Shall I fetch them?" Craddock shook his head. "We'll start with Horace. Then I'd like a word with Nat and Lily, separately if possible." In the library, Horace sat surrounded by books, his fingers stained with ink as he scribbled notes. He looked up, startled, as they entered. "Inspector, Miss Marple." "I'm just planning the museum. Lavinia's collection, her artifacts, her journals. It's overwhelming." His voice held a mix of awe and anxiety, and Miss Marple wondered if he was ready for the Folly's burdens. Craddock was direct. "Mr. Bindler, we've settled the murder, but there's a question of the estate's security. Lavinia suspected threats. Did she ever hint at trouble with the Fletchers? Or anyone else besides Miss Barrow?" Horace pushed his glasses up, his brow furrowing. "She mentioned Nat once, said he was surly, prone to outbursts, and Lily, she felt sorry for her, thought she was cowed by her husband, but nothing specific, just impressions." He hesitated, then added, "There was a letter, though, in her desk. Not the will, but something about a debt Nat owed. A gambling debt, I think. She was considering helping him, but only if he behaved." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. A debt could explain Nat's tension, Lily's fear. "Did she say how much?" she asked gently. Horace shook his head. "No, but Lavinia was generous when it suited her. She liked control, you know. Dangled help like a carrot." They left Horace to his books and walked to the gardener's cottage, where the air was thick with the scent of earth and roses. Lily answered the door, her face pale, her scarf absent for the first time. She invited them in, her hands twisting nervously. The sitting room was unchanged, the wedding photograph on the mantel a poignant reminder of happier days. Nat was absent, working in the orchard, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Craddock sat across from her, his tone kind but probing. "Lily, Clara's confessed, but we need to clear up a few things. You knew she borrowed your scarf. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared, sir. She said if I talked, she'd make it look like Nat did it. Said she'd plant evidence, like those papers in the greenhouse. And Nat, he's been so angry, I didn't want him in trouble." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soothing. "You've been very brave, my dear. But is there more? About Nat, perhaps? Did he know about Clara's threats?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. He saw her that night, by the greenhouse. Didn't tell me till later, but he was furious, thought I was helping her, keeping secrets. He's been gambling, see, and owed money to some rough men in Much Benham. Miss Greenshaw found out, said she'd pay it off if he kept quiet about her will, but he didn't kill her. I swear he didn't." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Did he see Clara burn the will?" Lily shook her head. "He only saw her with the bundle, same as me. He was in the greenhouse, checking the orchids, but he took something from her, later. A ring, one of Miss Greenshaw's. Said it was to pay the debt, in case she didn't come through." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It's in the shed, hidden under the floorboards." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "A ring! another piece of Lavinia's jewellery, like the sapphire brooch. She thought of a village blacksmith who had hidden stolen goods to settle a debt, only to be undone by a loose floorboard. "You've done the right thing, Lily," she said. "Let's fetch Nat, shall we?" Craddock sent a constable to summon Nat, who arrived with dirt-stained hands and a scowl that deepened when he saw Lily's tear-streaked face. "What's she been saying?" he demanded, his voice rough. Craddock was firm. "She told us about the ring, Nat. The one you took from Clara. Where is it?" Nat's defiance crumbled, his shoulders sagging. "Under the shed floor, like she said. I didn't know about the murder, I swear. Clara gave it to me, said it was a spare, that no one would miss it. I needed the money. Those blokes in Much Benham don't wait." His voice held a mix of shame and desperation, and Miss Marple saw the truth in his eyes, a man trapped by his own weaknesses, but not a killer. The constable retrieved the ring, a ruby set in gold, unmistakably Lavinia's, and Craddock added theft to the charges against Clara, who had likely used it to buy Nat's silence. "You're lucky it's not worse," Craddock told Nat, "but you'll need to answer for handling stolen goods." As they left the cottage, Miss Marple paused by the orchard, where the disturbed earth had first caught her eye. "It's over, Inspector," she said, her voice soft. "Clara killed for greed and fear, and Nat stole to save himself. But Lily, she's the one who paid the dearest price, carrying their secrets." Craddock nodded, his expression sombre. "You saw it before I did, Miss Marple." That scarf, the petal, the shorthand, it all added up. "But how did you know Clara would crack?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People like Clara build their lives carefully, but they're fragile under pressure. Like a house of cards, one push and it falls. The trap was just the push." She thought of a village girl who had woven a web of deceit to escape her past, only to be undone by a single careless word. That evening, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, where her nephew Raymond West was visiting, eager for details of the case. Over tea she recounted the story, her voice calm, but her eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "Greed is so predictable," she said, her needles clicking again. "Clara wanted a new life. Nat wanted freedom from his debts, and Lavinia wanted control. But it's the little things, the scarf, the laugh, the hidden ring, that betray them." Raymond leaned forward, his writer's mind alight. "It's like one of your novels, Aunt Jane." A perfect puzzle, solved by a spinster's eye. Miss Marple chuckled. "Hardly perfect, dear. Life is messier than fiction. But the Folly's legacy is safe now in Horace's hands. I only hope he's strong enough to bear it." As the sun set over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow across her garden, Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her mind already turning to the next puzzle life might bring. The Folly's shadows had been dispelled, but the village, she knew, would always hold new secrets, waiting for her quiet, unerring gaze to uncover them.